Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
This is Serious Privacy by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Paul Breitbart and Kay Royal.
CBPRs, BCRs, SCCs, we all know the abbreviations, but it's been a while since we had a good in-depth conversation about how all these international transfer mechanisms relate to each other. This week we do not have a guest, but there are quite a few updates, not in the least because the European Commission finally released the FAQs belonging to the standard contractual clauses that were released in June 2021. So this week, Kay and I will talk a lot about international transfers and how all the mechanisms relate to each other. My name is Paul Breitbart.
Hey, Roy, you broke me. And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy.
You do realize we're going to keep this in, right?
I know. I have had people say we should probably publish the raw YouTube video footage. Because I'm pretty sure not only can they hear me roll my eyes, they can hear yours. All right.
They can hear me shaking my head in desperation. Yeah. Desperation.
Yeah, right. And by the way, y'all should know that when he does his intro or his exit, and his exit is always, pretty much perfect. I'm sitting here making faces at him like crazy, which is really cute when we have a guest on here watching me do it. But he has now told me he has moved my face to another screen when he does the closing. But okay, I got a great question for you.
Or I just close my eyes.
Well, yeah, that too. What is your favorite piece of clothing? Oh, we've done this one before. But you know what? I'm going to ask it again. What's your favorite piece of clothing?
Well, maybe it's changed. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I certainly don't remember my previous answer. Have you written that down in your big book as well?
No, I just write down the dates.
To be honest, I think it should be a coat.
Okay. Are you having cold weather?
Well, we are having a bit of cold weather right now. It's gray and stormy and rainy, and yeah, it's not the spring weather that we would like. But no more a nice long wool winter coat.
Ah, nice. I don't know that I would have thought of it as my favorite piece of clothing, but in watching one of the snippets of webinars, I love this. TrustArc is giving snippets of webinars out on social media. And I've noticed for 2 or 3 webinars in a row, I've worn the same shirt. It's a bright pink sweater. It's very, very soft. I don't know if it's cashmere or not. I'd have to look. But it's a bright pink, very comfortable, just soft sweater that's like 3/4 sleeves, so not too short and not too long. And yeah, apparently that's my favorite piece of clothing.
It's your webinar shirt, at least.
Exactly, it's my webinar shirt.
But now you know that during our next webinar, I think we do a webinar on China somewhere soon. You should wear it because people will pay attention to it, what you are wearing on the webinar.
Exactly. That way we'll see how many pick up. Kay, do you ever change clothes? Only when it rots off my cold body.
No, we just record all the webinars on one day.
My husband and I do a, I don't know, it's not a podcast, but it's not really a video log. I guess the same thing. We do short little 10-minute snippets of what we call couples therapy. We haven't publicized it or broadcasted. We wanted to get some people's feedback on it. They love it. And we do 2 or 3 episodes in one evening. And then we'll take a break for a few weeks. And I will change shirts between them. He does not. So not sure how well that works. I will say, however, that one of the things, and I keep doing this throughout the shows, is I have the artificial makeup by UCAM on because I figured nobody deserves to see this. But if I duck my head or something, the makeup jumps to Tim.
Your hair gets the makeup. Ah, even better.
Yeah, it jumps to Tim. And you know what? I just go, thank you, UCAM. And we just keep on going because I absolutely think it's hilarious. And apparently so do other people. So let's talk about privacy a little bit. So as y'all can tell, this is a week with Paul and I, a week in privacy. And today, is it today? Today.
It is today. It's May 25th, 2022.
Do y'all know what happened on May 25th? About 4 years ago.
Well, no, 6 years ago.
Well, but it wasn't passed on May 25th the 2 years before, was it? It just went into enforcement on May 25th.
No, it was passed on 27 April 2016, which is King's Day in the Netherlands. It's our national holiday.
Ooh.
But the Netherlands held the EU presidency at the time. So our Minister for Defense was actually the one signing the GDPR on behalf of the Council.
Nice.
Because there was apparently a Defense Council in Brussels that day. But that was the formal adoption of the GDPR, 27 April 2016. And then on the 25th of May 2016, it entered into force. And on the 25th of May 2018, it entered into effect. No, it first entered into force, and then it entered into application or into effect.
Ah, got it.
So the 2 years, it was already law, but it was not enforceable yet.
Love it. Love it. And we did a whole session on the new Connecticut law that went active that is absolutely based on GDPR. So all the state laws you're seeing come into effect here in the United States, the majority of them are based off the GDPR, like Quebec's Bill 64, very deliberately based on the GDPR.
That is certainly true.
But no guarantee that China's PIPL is based on the GDPR.
Well, in any case, it's influenced by or inspired by the GDPR. And we know that it always was the European Union's intention, at least, to ensure that GDPR would become the global standard, at least de facto. Right. And I think to a large extent, that probably is true. It has at least inspired a lot of other jurisdictions in terms of what a law should contain. But there was this morning actually a piece in Politico in their Digital Bridge newsletter claiming that more and more, especially from the US side, but also in South America and Asia Pacific, GDPR is no longer seen as the global standard because they think it's being too difficult and that maybe there should be some other standards that should be negotiated that are both privacy friendly and consumer protecting, but also a little bit more business friendly than GDPR is perceived to be.
Ah, I will definitely make sure that I grab that to put it in the episode. But, you know, this brings up the thoughts that I had about recently in Hawaii. There was a meeting for the global cross-border transfer rules. And I've caught up with a couple of people. We should absolutely see if we can grab Josh Harris, who's with the Better Business Bureau, in here. He's been involved with the cross-border privacy rules for quite some time. And so now they're looking at making those global and having other countries sign into them. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, that's for sure.
Yeah, so this is indeed the APEC meeting that took place in Honolulu, where the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Declaration was announced by the US Secretary of Commerce. Basically, indeed, the extension of the CBPRs to more countries.
Yeah.
I'm not too excited about it, to be honest.
That's why I was asking.
Well, you know, the idea is nice, but you cannot say that CBPRs have been a terrific success. There is only a handful of countries that actually accept them. There's only a handful of companies that are using them. So it is not the success that it was hoped to be. And this seems to be like a bit of a last attempt to revive the mechanism by saying, hey, it will be even more successful than it was before, when it wasn't too successful before. So I'm cynical here.
Surprise, surprise.
Of course, in the end, it could be something. But also from the European perspective, all these self-certification mechanisms are not the way we like to do things. We prefer some form of stronger checks and balances, like codes of conduct that really require external review and certifications that require stamps of approval over self-certification options.
Now, what if they changed it to where it had to be a third-party certification?
Well, that could be something. And then you still need to see how successful it will become, how also business successful it might become. And that I don't know. But of course, I know that TrustArc has been involved with the CBPRs from the start, and that those reviews are actually thorough. So maybe in the longer run that will work. Let's hope so.
Doesn't sound like Paul's a big fan of this, does it?
Well, I like the outside verification. I said a model like the codes of conduct, the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, for example, I think is much more reliable, also much more diligent in the way the checks are conducted.
Right.
Not saying that the people doing the CBPR checks are not doing that diligently, but I think the level of checks is much more stringent for a code of conduct than for the CBPR mechanism. Look, for example, this week, Cloudflare announced that they are joining the EU Cloud Code of Conduct. Their stock price soared 22%.
Pretty good.
That's a clear indication that also the market likes those kinds of verifications of a privacy program and those assurances that company can get.
Well, it begs the question then, this thingy that is going to be put in place between the EU and the US. And for those of you that haven't heard those episodes, the thingy is this agreement in principle that's going to be put in place that we don't know what the name's going to be. So we're going to call it the thingy. This thingy, do you think that part of what they might require is third-party certification as opposed to self-certification? Now, self-certification is specifically something the US really, really loves. Us in our wild, wild west behavior. We love self-certification. But do you think that might be one of the things up for consideration?
I would like to see that, but I doubt that we will see it because I don't expect too many changes to the commercial side of the follow-up of the Privacy Shield, the successor of the Privacy Shield. We discussed before, the commercial side will probably stay more or less the same, vouching that you comply with a series of principles which have not significantly changed since Safe Harbor went into effect in 2002.
Something like that.
So also for the new agreement in principle, I don't expect that external verification or validation will be a requirement, if only because there are so many thousands of companies that want to rely upon this that it will be very hard to find sufficient organizations able and willing to do those verifications within a very limited amount of time.
Yeah, that could
so
be.
Also from a feasibility perspective, I don't see that happening. If you see, for example, how slowly the process is before new companies join the Cloud Code of Conduct, which is also probably on the side of the companies, I'm pretty sure of that. But that goes in a few rounds, those discussions. So Just realistically speaking, I don't see that happening for the Privacy Shield replacement.
Well, and on Europe's side, they're concerned about a lot of things. But when it comes to this certification process, they're probably more reassured with the enforcement if something goes wrong, as opposed to necessarily whether the certification is by a third party or self-certification up front, as long as there is strong enforcement in place behind it.
Yes, I think that is the main concern. I've seen some comments also on the commercial side, not in the least the open letter that Max Schrems published on Monday at the start of CPDP, which takes place this week in Brussels, also calling for improvements on the commercial side. Also basically announcing that if Noib is not satisfied with the details of the thingy, that they will go to court so that there will be a Schrems 3, but that they are still hoping that the European Commission will negotiate with the US in such a way that that won't be required. because in the end, for them, it's also about ensuring that there are acceptable levels of protection when transferring personal data and that those
Right.
data flows can take place. That's
Right.
also made explicit in that letter.
And the individual's right for redress.
So, yeah.
Right.
So what do you think? What do you think about the CBPR?
I think they are somewhat promising because a lot of people, a lot of companies would love the ability to have one consistent mechanism for all countries that have cross-border transfer rules. And there's almost 100 of those that are not just in Europe. So, and a lot of them have similarities, such as if you have a contract in place, something along that lines, or the individual consents as a derogation. So considering that there are so many similarities in the controls that would be required in order to justify or permit a cross-border transfer, then I think having a consistent mechanism globally would be a fantastic thing to have in place. And that way you don't have one thing in place for some countries and another thing in place for other countries and yet another thing in place for Europe. And so I do think having a global cross-border transfer control would be a good thing that the world would welcome. Now, that has nothing to do with whether or not I think it would actually happen.
No, that's true. Earlier this week at CPDP, I wasn't there, but I'm having serious FOMO, so I'm trying to catch all the panels just by following the tweets and catching up on the tweets at the end of the day.
I'm getting that impression by the number of times you've mentioned that you're not at CPDP.
Computers, Privacy and Data Protection.
Got it. CDPB.
Almost all of our friends are there, so we should have been there. That's basically the conclusion of this week.
Well, Emerald,
but also Professor Graham Greenleaf she's there.
Yeah, I was going to say Emerald had posted that she wanted to make sure people were purposeful about meeting together because apparently it's held in multiple buildings. And I can say that from being at IAPP in DC, you could absolutely miss people being there because you find out their tweets or their posts afterwards. You're like, how did I miss you? Like Durso from Brazil. I completely missed him at IAPP. So she was saying you had to be deliberate about meeting. And Ralph, of course, spoke up. Ralph O'Brien spoke up and said, yeah, I'll be there. Let's meet and hug. He might not have said, let's meet and hug. He might have just said, let's meet. The hug may have came from me. And I said, absolutely, please give each other a big hug from me and none of this polite European hug stuff. I want a real deep Southern hug from me to each other. And Ralph's like, well, that will have to come with explicit consent.
Well, that's a fair point. Yeah, especially in Europe.
Oh, goodness.
But yeah, Professor Graham Greenleaf, he was on one of the panels about global data flows and also updating his list of countries with privacy laws. Can you make a guesstimate? How many countries do currently have privacy and data protection laws, where the US counts as one? So not necessarily at national level, but
134.
157.
Ooh, I was going to go with 147 and I lowered it.
So there are 157 countries with data protection laws. About 130 of them make data exports contingent on the level of protection in the recipient country, which means that if you take the European Union as a whole, there are about 13,000 bilateral data export problems, and only a handful of those have been solved. From his slides, for example, on a transfer from Australia to South Korea and vice versa, or from South Africa to Argentina and vice versa. There are way too many problems on international data flows still to tackle. And we've been dealing with these issues for 40 years without any solution that has been found yet.
And I will say that the caveat on the countries also depends on how you count the countries in the world. There are about 5 different ways of how countries are counted, depending on whether something is a self-regulated area or regime, or whether or not something is a province or a territory of another country, and whether or not it's a self-regulating territory or not. So I learned this from doing a presentation a few months ago that, yes, it also depends on how you count the countries.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But at the same time, I think he is okay. He's fairly diligent in doing his counts.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's 157.
I'll have to look for that. We'll post that in the description.
Yeah, I've sent you the link of the slides so we can post it. And yeah, that was just one of the very nice tidbits out of CPDP. There is a handful of new reports from the Future of Privacy Forum, including one on data protection in Africa and also one on artificial intelligence. So they have both been released in the run-up to the conference. So again, worth a mention.
Okay, so that leads us into a couple of other things that we were planning on talking about anyway. One of them being the ICO. So the UK has released a couple of months ago. So this came in force in March, but their international data transfer agreement and guidance. And Paul and I have not yet actually talked about it on the podcast yet. So, and after that, we'll move on to the absolutely brand new FAQs on the standard contractual clauses issued by the European Commission.
Absolutely. So the ICO has indeed approved, together with the UK Secretary of State and the UK Parliament, the new international data transfer agreements. I'm sure we've discussed them before, because basically they are the UK equivalent of the standard contractual clauses. Also, the ways of working is fairly similar, although the annexes that have to be filled out for the standard contractual clauses in the UK are called schedules and are at the front of the document. But content-wise, they are very much alike. And they are all posted on the website of the Information Commissioner's Office. And you can use them in a similar way as you would standard contractual clauses for all data exports out of the United Kingdom. So from there, you fill out the IDTA, you sign them on both sides, and then they would be valid. But also here, you will need to conduct your transfer risk assessment. The ICO still feels, or the UK still feels, bound by the Schrems II decision, also by the assessment of the legislation in especially the United States, but also knowing that an adequate level of protection requires essential equivalence. I think that message is probably true by now for most countries around the world. So also the UK continues to rely upon that assessment. So you have to find out whether all the guarantees that the data exporter and the data importer are giving in the transfer agreement, whether those guarantees can also actually be met, whether you can fulfill your promises on how you protect personal data. And that also means that you will need to do your risk assessments up front to ensure that you can actually meet those.
Absolutely. And they do give transitional provisions that any contracts concluded on or before September 21st of this year of any transitional standard clauses continue to provide safeguards for the purpose of the GDPR until March 21st of 2024. So about 18 months, almost exactly. Go figure, I can calculate. Provided that the processing operations that are the subject matter of the contract are the same. They're unchanged, and reliance on those clauses ensure the transfer is subject to appropriate safeguards. Now, this is one thing that privacy officers have a hard time keeping up with, is that the data elements, the sensitivity of the data subjects, the scope of what is actually covered can change. Scope creep in using a vendor changes quite often. And so this only is in effect as long as those elements are unchanged. Now, it does say the subject matter, the processing operations that are the subject matter are unchanged. So that also means other things in that process are unchanged, not just that specific exchange. So do make sure that you watch those. And then, of course, as Paul mentioned, that there is a specific addendum that can go to the EU standard contractual clauses. So you don't have to renegotiate. You can continue to use those as long as you add this addendum into it from the ICO.
Yeah, that's probably the part I like best about the whole UK approach. And we will see probably something like that from other jurisdictions as well. And I would hope that the European Union would do something similar for standard contractual clauses or whatever you would call them from other jurisdictions, so that indeed you can sign an addendum which ensures the essential equivalent level of protection from your headquarters. So if your headquarters is in the EU, you can use also for UK-based data transfers the EU SECs. If your headquarters are in the UK, you would be able to use the International Data Transfer Agreement with an addendum for your European subsidiaries, but similarly for New Zealand or Argentina, or maybe even for the whole Spanish-speaking region, because there are SECs for the Ibero-American Data Protection Network. There are SECs for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. There will even be SECs under Convention 108+. That work is also ongoing. So if you would be able to use those standard contractual clauses with addenda to make them work in other jurisdictions, I think that would be very welcome, and that might be a start to finding some sort of global solutions, at least until we have the real international agreement that will ensure good levels of data protection wherever.
Right, absolutely. So with that, let's move on to the FAQs that were also issued on the standard contractual clauses, which I've read through these. And a lot of them are basic knowledge for SCCs, for experienced privacy professionals. We already know this, but a lot of it, I think, is awesome.
Yeah, a lot of them seem like the ones that we wrote last year when the new SCCs came out, actually.
They do.
Explaining how do they work, what do you need to do.
Yeah, what is the docking clause for? Does it actually work? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's great that they are there. I'm surprised it took the Commission so long to actually draft them. I think a lot of these could probably have been drafted straight away. And the one or two questions that we still had are not answered in these FAQs.
No, they're not.
Especially on the scope of application. That is the one part that is still completely open. The Commission says, no, if GDPR applies to you directly, you cannot use the SCCs, or if GDPR applies to the processing operation at hand, you cannot use the SCCs. And no, we are still developing new standard contractual clauses for that scenario without a timeline. I'm a bit disappointed, to be honest, when I read through these.
Me too.
Yeah. The only real clarification that I found was in question 15. In which form should instructions by the controller be given to the processor? And I think many people always assume that those instructions should be part of the contract. And here the Commission says, no, that's not necessary as long as they are documented. So it can be in the contract, but it can also be in an email. It can be in other ways of writing. For example, the minutes of a meeting. This can even be a recording of the meeting or the recording of a phone call, because that would also be documentation. So they need to be documented, the instructions that you provide. But apart from that, I'm afraid there is not a lot of news in these FAQs. When I saw that they are coming out, finally, we'll get some answers. But
yeah, when you told me that's the exact same response I had was, finally, maybe we'll get some answers.
Not so much.
But in addition to your question 15, which I had already, or fact 15 that I already picked out, I will say I do like that they included questions, or not questions, but I guess they are questions 38 and 39, which are 38 is for module 1, 2, and 3, which data protection authority should be designated as the competent authority. Now, this is actually made pretty clear in the SCCs themselves, but I do know that a lot of entities still have questions about this. So if the data exporter is established in the EEA, it should be the one that's competent to oversee compliance. For businesses carrying out cross-border processing activities is the lead supervisory authority. That's clear as mud. If you're established in the EEA, your data protection authority should be the one that your headquarters is located at. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Unless your headquarters is merely
an empty shell,
office work, and the operations with the data absolutely occur in another. but take that into account. It's either your headquarters or it's where you're processing the data. If you're not established in the EEA, but directly subject to GDPR, it tells you that your data protection authority will be, if you had to appoint a representative, it's going to be where the representative is established. If you didn't have to appoint one, it's where the data subjects are located. But that's kind of pretty clear in the SCCs themselves. But it did go to question 39. Are there any requirements for filling in the annexes? So this is similar to question 15 that you just covered. How detailed should the information be? And it does give some good information about that as well. So even though it's not new information, it is helpful that they took the time to put these FAQs all in a central location, which, by the way, you and I probably could have added a few more questions to our FAQs and provided the exact same information. But hey, they did issue something.
Well, true. And there is one more tidbit that I found that I had not heard before. Maybe that's because I missed it. But that's in Q25. Can the SCCs be used to transfer personal data to an international organization? There, the Commission says no, because they're not suitable for international organizations. But we are also working on SCCs specifically tailored for international organizations, also taking due account to specific privileges and immunities. For example, following international or headquarter agreements. And that would be important for the United Nations, for the ICRC, for UNICEF, for UNHCR, for the European Patent Office, and many others, to which also now data cannot be easily transferred, despite them often having a decent, if not a good, data protection regime. So also there, we will get some answers from the European Commission at some point.
We're holding our breaths, waiting for the international data transfer, whatever they're going to issue. Yeah.
Well, yeah, a little bit, because the other thing that I had hoped to see today has still not appeared, and that is the evaluation of all the adequacy decisions. We spoke about it briefly last week with Shay from PwC regarding Israel, but still we do not have the evaluation of the adequacy decisions that predate GDPR that was already finalized by the time that the Schrems II decision landed, but just had to be updated. Those were more or less the words of the European Commission at the time. So I really don't understand why that is the case, that document still has not been released, also because right now it's not completely certain what the status of those old adequacy decisions is. I assume that they remain valid.
Right.
But the Commission should have evaluated them already.
We're all taking for granted that they remain valid.
Yeah, also because there is no statement to the contrary.
Right.
And in this situation, I think that the Commission really wants to screw up things. They would have said, oh no, we just didn't do our homework in time, so all the adequacy decisions are now gone. I think that would really not be well appreciated by the business community around the world.
True. And then from a European perspective, are any of the work that we're hoping will come out, will that continue over the summer, or will that be delayed over the summer?
Which work do you specifically mean? The thingy or others?
Mostly related to the international transfers and in whatever addition to the SCCs or information on the SCCs for international transfers is going to come out from Europe. I mean, that's something we've been waiting on. It's not there yet. I thought this was going to be a step towards that. Maybe it is for them to get their thoughts together. But, there's a couple of things that we're waiting on from the authorities in Europe, whether it's the Data Protection Board or the Commission or whatever. Do they take summer off?
Well, Brussels is typically closed in August.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that nobody works. But we'll have to see how that turns out in practice. I don't know how fast that will go. There is no clear timeline.
Because here in the U.S., you wouldn't have to worry about work slowing down for summer break. We don't take summers off.
No, I mean, Brussels definitely slows down in August, and there certainly will not be anything big released in August. So I'm hopeful that, for example, for the thingy, we would see draft language before the Brussels summer break, so that the European Data Protection Board can, for example, set to work as soon as people start coming back from vacation.
Okay.
But I don't know. I haven't heard any rumors
Okay.
to timelines.
Okay. Well, that's a great note to end the show on, is to be continued, but not by us. We're waiting with bated breath.
Yeah, at least not today. I'm sure we'll revisit the topic at some point in the not too distant future. But for now, thank you for listening to another episode of Serious Privacy. If you like us, please rate and review us in your favorite podcast app. Find us on LinkedIn. Find us under Serious Privacy. On Twitter as Podcast Privacy. You'll find Kay on Twitter as Heart of Privacy and myself as EuroPolB. And if you want to send us an email, you can do so at seriousprivacy@trustarc.com or via info@seriousprivacy.eu. I think those were all the accounts that I should mention, despite Kay making all her faces. Thank you for listening to us again, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye for now.
Bye, y'all.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace, so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.